So when we're doing goniometry of the wrist, we're going to have the elbow flexed anywhere between 70 and 90 degrees. When we're doing muscle length testing, we're going to have the elbow fully extended. So that's the only difference, okay? So first I'll go through the goniometry. So we're going to have the elbow bent, and then we'll talk through the muscle length testing, but it's the exact same test, okay? So and let me have you scoot forward just a little bit. There you go. So we're going to have the wrist hanging off the table, and we're going to do flexion first. So passively, go ahead and relax. So I'm going to bring her down and feel the end feel, and it's a nice capsular end feel. Lovely. Then I'm going to line up. Oh, I'm not on a rolly chair. I'm like, oh, I'm not rolling. Okay, so I'm going to line up. I asked for the big goni, but it's too long. So for these, again, remember you want the protractor to be on the stationary arm. So I just move it and see if the protractor moves, then I know which is which. So again, we're just going to bisect the segments. You're going to go just distal to the ulnar styloid process. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring you down. So I'm doing passive range of motion here. Cheating a little bit. There we go. You have very tight goniometers. They're very nice that way. So I have 0 to 80. Now, these goniometers only read to 2 degrees. Okay. So if you give me an odd number, I will think you're a little weird. So this is 0 to 70. No, I'm sorry, 88 degrees. Okay. We always measure these on the outside of the arm. Okay. So we don't have her supinated and do it there. So for flexion, we're going to stay in this exact same position. I'm sorry, for extension, and she would just come up. Okay, so I could test. Now, the one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to be moving the fingers. You want to be using the palms, let the fingers relax, and we're going to be measuring like that. So then we would just put the goni there. I was doing passive range of motion. See very well. There you go. And so that's how you're going to measure extension. So what you're not going to do is flip her hand over and then measure extension this way, because the thumb gets in the way. So you're going to keep it palm down for both of those. Now the muscle length tests, you're going to measure the exact same way. What we're measuring is the length of the two joint wrist flexors and wrist extensors. So those muscles that are attaching to the lateral and medial epicondyles. So to lengthen those at the elbow, we need to have our elbow all the way straight. Okay, so normally we'd have you lean back into the table. Mm-hmm. There you go. And then we're going to measure the same thing. So if we're measuring flexion, and you are a little tight, so her end field changes when I straighten out her elbow. But if I'm measuring this direction, I am measuring the length of what muscles? Wrist flexors or wrist extensors? Wrist extensors. Okay, and again, this is a passive test. So I could compare the angle that I get this way from what I got from passive range of motion goniometrically. Okay, and then for the if I'm going to test the length of the wrist flexors, then I'm going to go in the opposite direction, but with the elbow straight. Okay, so for the muscle length testing, you're going to document a single number. You're going to say wrist flexors. Those are all two joint muscles that we're assessing. So then in parentheses, you're going to write wrist extension, right? Because I said we're testing wrist flexors. Measuring wrist extension, and then you'll have a single number there, okay? Because remember, for any two joint muscles, you always need to say what joint you're measuring. In theory, you could maximally lengthen the muscle here and then measure elbow extension, but we don't ever do this test that way because there's more motion that is occurring at the wrist. Okay? So we've covered goniometry for wrist flexion and extension and the muscle length test for the wrist flexors and the wrist extensors for the two joint muscles. All right? So I'm going to scoot you back a little bit. For radial and ulnar deviation of the wrist, we are going to be using the third ray, and then our stationary arm is going to bisect the forearm, and our axis is going to be that capitate. Okay? Oh, very nice capitate. Nice goniometers and nice capitate. Man, you're just hitting the mother load here. Okay, so we're lining up. Now, when we're in this position, now I can also, again, if I was doing passive range of motion, I could test and feel, very much capsular that way. I have to take the goniometer off if I'm going to test and capsular that way as well. Now find that lovely capitate again. Now, when you, especially when you have them do it actively, I'm actually going to have you do it actively so I can show this. Let's have you go towards your thumb, move your wrist, there you go. Oh, and she didn't cheat at all. What some of you overachievers are going to do is actually deviate, and you're going to AB duct at your MCP joints. Don't follow the fingers, follow the metacarpal, okay? So that can be a little bit misleading. And so that's how you're going to measure it. You can relax for me. That's how you're going to measure radial and ulnar deviation, and you can do it actively and passively at the wrist too. Okay? So why don't you go ahead and practice